Some of you guys write me just because you need to lose like 5 or 10 pounds, and some of you write me because you need to lose 50 or more, or 100. And a few of you because you're like supersized and you need to drop like 6. I got a couple people, honestly, that are about 600 pounds and lost a bunch of weight and are losing weight. But I get a few outliers who contact me because they're just suicidal. And I want to talk to them today and to everybody else who has been wondering about depression. I said I would do a video on depression. There's two types of depression. One is chemical, that it has some natural or hormonal result, and then there is ideological depression. The first is you'll know because you'll just say to yourself, I should be happy. I have every reason to be happy, but I'm not. And you'll be able to track it, especially if you're going around and you break into tears or something like that. It's usually very easy to tell if you have a chemical-based depression that comes from a lack of your body making something. Let me just say to that, if that's you, go and get medication. Even if you believe it's you, go and get medication. You can always adjust your dosage or stop. But I do get contacted by people that have struggled with that for a long time. And then I get contacted by these people who are, I don't go with Big Pharma, and then they start going off about the evils of drugs. We live in a time when you can take advantage of drugs in a positive way. If you live far from your company, you don't have to go back in the 1800s and take a horse and buggy to work. You don't say, well, it was good enough for them, so it's good enough for me. No, you take a car or the bus at the worst. If you go to the hospital, you don't say, well, in the 1800s they didn't have pain reliever or good enough painkillers, so therefore I can't use anesthetizing drugs to stop the fact that I smashed my arm and have to have a cast on it. No, you can use pain relievers. So don't start thinking like that. Don't start thinking that you can't take advantage of means to help yourself. That's what I want to cover first. And then now that we've gotten that out of the way, I want to move on into ideological depression, which is the most common type. This is what people struggle with, and the reason you struggle with ideological depression is because you had a feedback loop built up from when you were little. And what happened when you were little was your parents told you, mind your manners, don't talk when adults are talking, go to bed, brush your teeth. You had to do everything in deference for something else. And then you went into school. And what do schools in the West teach? They teach that humans suck, that you don't matter. And again, you have to keep deferring yourself. They teach, for instance, if you went through a college astronomy class or any natural sciences, they teach that humans are just a bunch of minerals. So basically, you're just a talking monkey, and the universe is so big. And when you look at the size of galaxies and nebula, you realize that we're not even a speck of a speck of a speck of a speck. And the entire universe is literally so big that we will never even contact our most closest neighbor galaxy, Andromeda. We'll never reach them. They'll have to come here because the universe is so big and we are just so insignificant. We can't even leave our little planet. And then you go through life and with those lessons in mind, you try to build relationships, but you have the same self-esteem destroying ingredients at the core. And those ingredients say, you suck, you're not worth it. So you start to marry the wrong person, and you start to date the wrong person. You start to give up on your dreams because you start to believe, God darn, you're not worth it. And that becomes an accepted truth, and it becomes a self-fulfilling cycle. If you're not worth it, why should you care? Why does it matter to you what anything happens? Obviously, we're going to die anyway, right? Rain falls on the just and the unjust, so what does it really matter? Well, this may seem like kind of an odd approach to things, but this is the real reason that most of you are depressed, because you were born and you start to believe you feel like you weren't meant to count. That's a problem. And it's a problem because it's wrong. I'm not trying to pep talk you. The reason you've subscribed to this channel, for as long as you have, assuming you're not joining us just now, is because you hear the truth that is not corrupted by popular opinion. You matter to the universal scheme of things because it can't be any other way. You possess one quality, if none other, that makes you irreplaceable to the universe, irreplaceable in the collective sense. You possess consciousness, and consciousness is the one highest factor of the divine. The fact that you ask the question, why am I me and not someone else or something else? That is the divine essence. Ever since you're born, every child asks the question over and over, why, 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 why? What else do children do? They draw. They construct things, and those things are bits and pieces of lots of different things. That's why cartoon makers, they know that. That's why they make cartoons, and the frog is talking to a sheep, talking to a lion, whereas in the wild they wouldn't do that. Because you have to grow up a while to figure out that a lion does not have anything to do with a sheep or a frog, to figure out, hey, this is not how things work. But really, it's just an adjustment of things to terms most familiar, which allows you to grow up to see that a frog and a lion don't work together. It's really not true. The truth is that when a child views the world, they view it as their canvas and as themselves as the painter. That's an attribute of the divine. You do that, they do that, because they're uncorrupted. And when they don't get what they want, they cry because they know they're entitled to it. Well, they're actually right. But of course, to live in the world, we have to make adjustments. We have to say we can't get everything, which is also true. You can't have everything you want. You can't have all the things you want. You can only have some. So we go through life. Some people can make a compromise and some people can't. So if you're watching this video and you're one of the ones who seems to never have always struggled with depression, like I have, then you can relate to this. And the problem is it sets up a feedback loop that you always judge yourself on. No matter whatever happens, you start to say, well, I was not meant to count. And even if you don't say that in so many words, you say that because that's how you are. You've developed that pattern, but you're not alone. You and many others feel the same way. But depression is a gift, and it's a gift because it helps you navigate through this problem. So let's consider a few things. When you think of your grandmother or your aunt or anyone else in your life, what do you really think? Just stop for a minute and think of someone special to you. You think of their face. Why is that significant? You don't think of their muscular build or their ability to speak multiple languages or their ability to do good at their accounts payable job. You think about their face. Because our brains, our minds, up here is where our godlikeness is in essence. We are the eyes of the universe. We are the faces of the universe. It took all of this giant, remote, vast Milky Way galaxy to create one planet with life on it. We've looked at all the other planets, or a lot of them, at least the ones closest to us. We've looked under rocks. We've looked far away. We've looked nearby. I follow the newsletter from SETI, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. And we're pointing our radio signals at each and every one of these stars nearby. We've gotten 0 signals back. What does that mean? It means that you are very rare. But the fact that you're rare increases your value exponentially. Because if life were all over the place, your value would go down. But instead, your value is up. What you possess the ability to do is to walk into a room and squash a bug without even thinking about it. You possess the ability to put on your headphones and listen to a song and go for a jog. And what you're actually doing is you're putting together algorithms, godlike complexes, and enjoying it. You are listening to the music of the spheres, regardless of what you listen to, whether it's rap or rock or soul or who cares. The fact that you have music in the first place is something that is so far above nature. It could never happen in the natural world, which is why, if you're following the TED Talks and you're following planetary science and cosmology like I like to do, like the geek I am, you're finding that people are getting closer and closer to the rare earth hypothesis. They're saying, when we look at ourselves, we look at nature, we find that there's nothing in nature that represents us, which only goes to prove my point. When we do find life in the universe, if we do, we will find the whole spectrum. We will find the lowest bacteria and the highest one who is the master of it. Just like we are of our creation. We will not find little bugs under a surface that never grew up and then died under a rock. NASA's looking in the wrong place, and they're going to figure out that I'm right What moved me from positive atheism to animism to pantheism, essentially, is the fact that everywhere we look in the universe, we find that we are unique. But when we look harder, we find that life exists everywhere. It exists at the bottom of the ocean next to lava, next to magma vents, when that should be too hot. It exists far up in the oxygen-less ozone, up at the very top of our atmosphere, just as space is beginning. We find all sorts of crazy microbes that logic tells us should not exist. And what we learn from studying theology is that God exists from our gaps of our knowledge of the world. That's where God existed. Everything we can't explain, we say God did it, which I used to say was a big flaw with all divine theism. But the more I look at nature, the more I look at the world, those gaps have to be there. And the reason they have to be there is because the universe is essentially running away from itself, which explains why in any discipline you can think of, there are always unknowns. And no matter how you continue to explore those unknowns, the unknowns just change. It's like grabbing a balloon that's deflated and, it pops up between your knuckles on the outside of your hand, and every time you try to squeeze in all of the little parts, something else seems to get out. That has to happen for the same reason the universe itself is expanding. The universe is expanding because it's trying to outrun itself. It cannot replicate itself. There can be no two of the same thing, just as there's no two of you. You can clone yourself. You can have a twin, but they're not the same. Not even close. There are so many differences. The meaning of life is to continue to create unknowns. You are the pattern seeker. It is your job to reduce to terms most familiar the things you see. But it's the universe's job to create from the raw, things that you have not seen. That's why every time we study a new planet, every time we find a new pulsar, every time we find a new species on Earth, which we're still not done doing, we're still not done digging under the ocean and finding all sorts of crazy critters we thought were extinct or we thought couldn't be. There's espresso here. We're finding that those are still telling us something about ourselves. And they're telling us that it's the universe's job to create what otherwise could not be. And that's why as the universe is expanding, we're finding more planets. And not one can ever be like another. There's the same types, the same size, but they're not the same. And if there ever came to a point where the universe could not produce anything else, I don't know, I guess we'd have another Big Bang. Maybe that's the reason for it all. I'm speculating because we don't know. How would we? But what we do know is that if you went far enough, if you could go far enough in the universe, in any one direction, you would have to start seeing again exactly what you came from. Look up Einstein's saddle theory of 1905. It's fascinating stuff because nothing else that could be after a while. You are the only creature that has the ability to share in the knowledge that gives everything meaning. And so while you depend on every element that was thrown out of a dying star, oxygen, and helium, and hydrogen, and all of these elements, carbon, the elements that make you what and who you are, the universe depends on you. You know that because the universe cannot perceive itself. It is dead. Except when it comes together, it allows you to view it. So that is how you have the ability to be a god, to be something that is far greater than the animals. You possess consciousness. You possess sentience. You possess the ability to ask, why me? And why am I me and not someone else or something else? None of the lower animals have that. So if you struggle from depression, you have only to look back and look at the roadmap. And it's not a question of having done to arrive, because you never arrive. It is not your role to arrive. It is your role to realize that if we, in the span of time, never find any other 10,000, 20,000, 100,000 years, never find any other life in this universe, it would eventually be up to us as a species to create ourselves, because nothing else could happen. And it's the fact that we don't know. that gives the journey meaning in the first place. What happens in a game of chess when you find a forced checkmate? You tip the king over because there's no point in playing the game, you know the end. There's no magic for that. What you want to do is you want to know that there's a chance. You want to know that you have the ability to do something that you don't have control over. That's wanting a surprise. But the contradiction is, if it's a surprise, you can't control it, and therefore you can't know it. Do you see now why the things you can't control in life are actually teaching tools? They're actually the things that make your life more meaningful. And the fact that you doubt your own self, that's the thing that keeps you striving to keep making progress. It is a blessing that only if you lost would you see the value of. If I could give you the power right now to become like that Dr. Manhattan guy and just produce any object into existence or out of existence, your life would become such a miserable hell that you could only end it. And that's the secret of the divine. The divine itself has imbued itself everywhere so that it's constantly running from itself. It doesn't know what's going to happen. The God complex consists of you and I. We, the eyes of the universe that allow it to view itself. But it can't know itself because omniscience cannot know itself any more than fire can burn itself, or a knife can cut itself, or a finger can touch itself. It can't happen that way. So that's the divine contradiction. And that's the reason, this even according to Vedic cosmology. By the way, this is not earth-shattering stuff. The ancients knew this 8,000 years ago. Go back and look up some of the early Vedic writings about expansions and explosions. This nonsense about the Big Bang, this is Johnny-come-lately stuff. We've known for a long time that the universe is all about expansion and contraction. It's really not new stuff. So what we're doing here is basically toying with the idea that we, regardless of how you crack it, are still at the point where we are the decision makers. You have powers that you don't even know you have. You have the ability to appreciate the span of time, a thing that none of the lower animals know how to do. So for those of you who are thinking of taking your lives, you can take your lives. And a life that has no value to itself probably should end at some point. But if you do that, all you're doing is removing yourself. You're cutting out a set of eyes of the universe. You are removing yourself from the complex. But you're not changing consciousness. The one thing that all humans share equally, the only true brain of the Godhead, which is the shared consciousness of everybody. And what do? You only make somebody else's existence more difficult, more imbalanced. So you have to ask yourself, why is that a value to me? Because death is not an experience. You can no longer experience anything in death. Why would you want to proceed in that direction? It is far easier to look around your life and realize that all of your limitations increase your value. Much the same way, the fact that you are a certain height and a certain size and a certain intelligence increases your value because it increases the opportunity of the circumstances, you and the circumstances around you, making a decision that changes the fate of those around you. And of course we all do. We all fit perfectly into a circumstance that nobody else is in, and we all have opportunities that nobody else has. This is why everything that is happening to you, around you, is the will of the divine. And it sounds completely silly because we have been taught to dismiss those kinds of ideas as superstitious and nonsense. But they're absolutely true, because it can't be any other way. What is the difference between a universe with no life in it, with nothing at all? A universe that has only inorganic or unintelligent life, and a universe like ours with all of the above? Well, the answer is there's not three there, there's only two. There's the ability to perceive ourselves in our universe, and then there's the other two, which, without consciousness, there's no existence. The tree does not make a sound when it falls in the forest because you're not around, because sound is hearing and comprehending, which is a mental thing. It's a spiritual thing, to be able to say something fell. So regardless of what is happening, it might as well not even exist without you. And that's the proof that your place here, regardless of how miserable you may perceive it, is incredibly valuable, because it is now and will never be again. That gives you opportunities to do things, to experiment, to change things. And regardless of whether you think you succeed or fail, you succeed. Because our highest virtues in life are doing the things we enjoy. That's another contradiction, something you don't hear. A planet rotating purposely, a crashing satellite into a barren world, the dust particle arrangement on the far side of the moon, all of those things could not be any other way. And the fact that each element in the universe is doing what it has to do, that's perfection. Everything you see around you is not chance. That's the way it has to be. But you have to sit there a minute and take that into account, because we're not taught to think that way. That sounds crazy, but it's true. Everything around you, right here, right now, you watching this video, is equal to the best thing you will ever do in your life and the worst. You don't have to worry about losing. You don't have to worry about failing, because your value is right here and now. You don't even need to lose weight unless you decide that that's the next step for you. It's not as though you're not good enough or you're not talented enough. It does mean you are here right now, and the next step you pursue will be a part of what it is to be. Instead of getting depressed about that, realize that your moment now is the most important moment there is. So that's what I had to share today, and I do hope this has been beneficial to you. For those of you who are finding and struggling with meaning, you don't need to fight. You don't need to struggle, because just you doing the things that you're naturally apt to do, those are the things that are the highest things. Going to a concert, enjoying yourself, the things that you do not to get to another physical end. Going to work, to be able to pay a bill, to be able to live a happy life. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about doing the things that you would do if you had all the money in the world. That's the spiritual thing. It doesn't involve praying. It doesn't involve necessarily. It doesn't involve worshiping. It doesn't involve doing any of the things that you feel obligated to do or that you have to do. It involves doing what comes naturally to you. When you can learn to structure your life without guilt and without obligations, you start to realize you have a lot more choice than you thought you had.